Whether you just picked up an AWE exhaust for your Civic Type R, or you're looking to make a few adjustments to an existing system, follow my lead and I'll show you how to get it dialed in perfectly. Hey everyone, it's Sara from AWE, and today we're installing the Touring Edition exhaust with dual phase mid-pipe on this Civic Type R. Now, regardless of which system you chose, the install procedure will be the same, but before we get started, here's the tools you need to get it all done. For this install, you will need an impact gun as well as a ratchet, 10, 11, 14, 16, and 17 millimeter sockets, as well as a pry bar. We've already removed the factory exhaust. If you're not sure how to get that done, I put the link to the written instructions down below so you can take a look at that. We're gonna start with the installation of the AWE system, so grab your pry bar and your front pipe and I'll meet you at the inlet. Before we get started, make sure that you transfer over the gasket from your factory front pipe to the AWE front pipe. Also, you're gonna wanna remove one of the two motor mount bolts. We removed the one that's right here through the subframe. You can also remove the one that's right up front here. Doesn't matter, whichever one you'd like to take out. Next up, you're gonna take your pry bar and we're gonna go just to the back of the motor mount here. And the goal here is to pry forward just enough to give this front pipe room to go up and over the subframe. Slide your front pipe in, and right when you start to feel it hang up, pry forward, and you'll also need to twist at the same time until it's all the way up and in. Double check that your gasket is sitting properly in the front pipe and that your surface of the downpipe is clean so it can adhere to the front pipe. Go ahead and line up each of the openings. Grab your hardware and thread it in. Make sure you're tightening them down evenly and that nothing is contacting. There is a tiny bit of room for adjustment here. So if it is touching anywhere, you should be able to adjust this front pipe slightly and make sure it's not making contact. After you've checked for clearance, you can go ahead and tighten these bolts down using a 14 millimeter socket. Before we put the mid pipe up, we want to get the heat shield back in place. This should have been uninstalled while you were uninstalling your factory exhaust. Once you have it lined up, reinstall the factory hardware. Now I can tighten everything down. These two larger bolts are 14 millimeter. And the rest of them are 10s. Now this is a great time to check clearance of the heat shield to the front pipe. And if you need to make any adjustments, you can do it at this time. As I said before, there is a tiny bit of adjustment at the flange of the front pipe if you need that. Once you're happy with how it's sitting, you may need a wrench to do these last two bolts that are also 10 millimeter. Now we can get our mid pipe installed. Before we do that, we need to install the rubber isolator over the factory hanger. We have it lubed up to make it a little bit easier, and you want to make sure the word up is in the correct position as you slide it in place. Once we have the hanger in place, we can get the mid pipe installed. Now this is the dual phase. If you have the regular mid pipe, the install will be the same. Make sure you have your hanger over top of the front of the mid pipe, and we're going to slide it over the front pipe and then get the hangers through the rubber isolator. Next up is our midsection. Make sure the clamp is in place and then slide it over your mid pipe. You want the path of this section to follow the heat shield. We're gonna let this sit in place while we install our rear section. Before we install the rear section, we need to reinstall the rubber isolators. Again, you wanna make sure the word up is in the correct position. We do have them lubricated so they can slide on the factory hangers. And same thing on the other side. Now we can get our rear section installed. We have the Touring Edition here. And if you have the Track Edition, it will be the same, but just a little bit easier since it's not as heavy. We're getting it slid over the midsection. And then we'll get it in the hanger on each side. Now, if the hangers don't go all the way through the isolators at first, that's all right. We still have lots of adjustment to do to this rear section in order to get them to sit exactly where we want them. Now we can pull it through the other side. For those of you with the Touring Edition, make sure you install the hangers at the back. For the Track Edition, there are no hangers back here. Now we can get our tip section installed. It's important that you install it so that it's tapered upwards, and don't forget that clamp. With that in place, we can now install our tips. Before we can get our tips installed, we need to install the hardware through the bracket on the side. Take this lag bolt and go through the top, and then on the bottom, you can thread on the nut. We're just gonna snug it up for now, and we'll tighten it down later. Now we can get our tips in place. Now that we have everything mocked up in place, we can button up a few things and then adjust and tighten down our system. We're gonna start with reinstalling this motor mount. Make sure the opening in the motor mount is lined up. Thread in the bolt that holds down your motor mount. And with a 17mm socket, tighten this down. With the motor mount back in, we can take a second look at our system, make any adjustments, and then start to tighten it down. Before we do that, you want to take a second look at the front pipe, ensure there's still enough clearance around everything, and especially at the rear of this front pipe where it comes near the heat shield. Because of thermal expansion, when this heats up, it is possible it'll move back slightly. So you want to take a look and be sure there's enough clearance right around that area. If you like, you can also get a pry bar and just push up on the heat shield to ensure even once it heats up, there'll be no contact. Next up is the fitment of the mid-pipe. I wanted to point out that there's a rotation in the mid-pipe here, which changes how it sits in relation to this heat shield, but also changes how the front pipe sits in relation to that heat shield. So you want to take a look at all of your clearances and just know that you do have a little bit of a rotation here if you need to make any adjustments. Now we can go ahead and tighten down the joint between the front pipe and the mid-pipe. You want to make sure this is fully bottomed out before you tighten it down. Make sure your clamp is positioned on the side that provides more clearance to the heat shield, and that your clamp opening is not over one of the slots in the pipe, but rather over top of a flat portion. You also want to have your clamp about 1/8 inch over the edge of the pipe. Once you have it positioned to your liking, go ahead and grab a 16mm socket and tighten this down. Next up is the midsection. Now the rotation of this pipe affects how the tips are gonna fit in your bumper and also affects the clearance of that touring resonator on the heat shield. So what you can do is rotate this in order to dial in your tip fitment and ensure there's enough clearance. Once you have it rotated to your liking, go ahead and line up your clamps, same method as we did before. Ensure this pipe is fully bottomed out, and then go ahead and tighten it down. Next up is the touring or track sections. You just want to double check clearance on the subframe here, especially if you have the Touring Edition, check clearance on the heat shield. Make sure this pipe is fully bottomed out, and once you're happy with the fitment, go ahead and tighten it down. Next up is the tip section. You want to make sure it's as flat as possible so the tips will all be lined up. Go ahead and get your clamp in place, the same as all the other joints. Grab that 16mm and tighten it down. Finally, we can tighten down our tips. You want to take a look at how they're sitting, make any adjustments that you need, and go ahead and tighten them down. This is an 11mm socket, and we are going to use hand tools for this one. You'll see the bracket on the side of the tips compress, and once it's touching and the tip clamp is fully tight, you're good to move on to the next one. Once your system is on and tightened down, make sure you button up all of the heat shields and splash guards that you had to take down for uninstall. Once you've done that, it's always good practice to allow your system to idle and get up to operating temperature so that thermal expansion can happen, and you can double check to make sure all of your clearances are still perfect. And that's a wrap for our Civic Type R install. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up. Any questions, drop them in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on what's next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.